Shalom Bethel family. It is Thursday, once again time to review our Torah discussion from Congregation Bethel here in Norfolk this past Shabbat. This past Shabbat we read Parshat Toldot, and the Shabbat was themed on an issue that's very close to my heart, even closer this year than in the past, which I will explain in a moment. And that topic is organ donation and the mitzvah of being an organ and tissue donor. And we spoke about it in the context of Parshat Toldot, which is the Parsha that we were reading. In the Parsha, we find that Isaac is old. In fact, he calls to Esau, his son, and Esau comes and says, Hineni, here I am. And he says, Vayomer, he says, Hine nazakanti lo yadati yomoto. Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Right? And it says when he's coming that his eyes were dim. So maybe the fact that he's losing his eyesight has convinced him that he's old. He tells Esav, go and take your implements and catch some game, prepare it the way I like it so that my soul will bless you. Now, setting aside the idea that I just think it's neat that we give better blessings if the person pleases us, right? That it wasn't enough that he was his son that he wanted to give him a blessing. He's like, oh, make me a good meal, then my soul will bless you. I think that's a great concept. But to skip that for a moment, the question is, why does Isaac feel like he needs to bless his son now? Perhaps it's because his eyes are dim, as you're going blind. In that time, probably meant that you probably couldn't survive a long time unless you were a man of a certain stature or a person of a certain stature, because you couldn't do many of the things that you would need to do. There were no glasses, certainly no corneal transplants. Maybe that would have fixed Isaac's vision, but wasn't an option at the time, that miracle of interchangeable body parts, right? So perhaps he's just, taking part in the wisdom of end-of-life planning, for which I am a huge proponent. But for whatever reason, he decides this is the moment to bless his son. And Rashi comments on this, by the way. He wonders about the timing, and I'll tell you why in a sec. He says in his comment, Rashi, the medieval commentator, I do not know the day of my death. He brings a midrash. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha said, if a person reaches the age of the death of his parents, he should wonder 5 years beforehand and 5 years afterwards. And so he said, perhaps I will reach the age of the death of my mother, and she died at 127, and he was 123. And I am thus within 5 years of her age. Now, whether someone should worry when they get to that age or whether someone just does, right? How can you not? Boy, I'm this old and mom died, just a few years from now. They start to think about it. And then he says, I do not know the day of my death, right? Perhaps it'll be closer to when my mother died, perhaps closer to when my father died. He lived, right, Abraham quite a bit longer than Isaac's mother, Sarah. So Rashi's question, though, is why does he now feel like he needs to give the blessing? And it's a question that makes sense because we know, because we've read the book, that Isaac, in fact, lives another couple of decades, right? Jacob goes off to, after he successfully steals this blessing, tricks Isaac into giving him his blessing. Esav is incensed, says he's going to kill him. Says he's going to kill him. And so Jacob runs off at Rebekah's urging, and he's away, works 7 years to marry Leah, 7 years to marry Rachel, 7 more years just to accumulate wealth and fortune, and he doesn't come back for 2 decades, and Isaac's still alive. So why, in fact, does Isaac feel like he needs to give this blessing now? So let's call it good end-of-life planning that we should all think about. And when we're thinking about that, we should think about the question of organ donation. Now, it happens to be that a lot of Jews think or will raise the objection that their religion says they cannot be organ donors. That is false. Judaism does not say you cannot be an organ donor. I know there was a time that was the accepted wisdom, but it no longer is, really, in any major stream of Judaism. It is true that there are some more to the right side of Orthodox who would quibble with this, but even mainstream Orthodox however you would want to define that, accepts that organ donation is an okay thing. There were four major objections that are raised when it comes to organ donation, right? One is important. It's the question, when is a person actually dead, right? Because if a person is not yet deceased, we can't take their organs to give to someone else, in effect killing them. And when we take organs, the heart still needs to be pumping for those organs to be healthy. So we need to know if brain death, as we would call it, or brain stem death is an acceptable definition of death according to Judaism. The second major objection is what I would call the superstitious objection, which is that when Mashiach comes and we all come back to life, if we are short a kidney, then we won't be whole for God to put us back together. The third is that it is wrong to the desecration of a body, that, to cut into a body, to take an organ would be desecration. We're very careful to treat all the deceased bodies with respect. And hana'ah, we're not supposed to benefit from a body. We're not supposed to get material gain from a body. So this would be an objection if obviously we were selling organs for money or something, which is highly unethical and is not done. So to approach these objections one at a time, as far as the moment of death, it is accepted overwhelmingly that brain death in Judaism is death. I brought a text from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, one of the great poskim, great religious decisors of the 20th century at the Yeshiva University, who said, noting that there was a liquid test that could be injected into the body to find out whether or not the connection between the brain and the rest of the body was still working, even if the heart was pumping or there was a machine breathing for the person. And that because we can tell that, we know that if the destruction, let me get this right. If the connection has been broken between the brain and the rest of the body, and destruction of the brain has set in, and it's not working anymore, this is the same as death by decapitation. Obviously, thank God, not actually, but that's basically what's happened, that is as good as dead. And he goes on, even if he can be made to breathe by a respirator, even though he has died, this does not declare him alive, right? So just because someone's on a ventilator or a heart and lung machine, it doesn't mean that they are alive. It just means that a machine is breathing for them. So number one, brainstem death is in fact, by Jewish definition, death. Number two, the superstitious question, right? We believe that if and when Mashiach comes and he reincarnates all of the Jewish people who have a place in the Olam Haba, all of humanity who has a place in the Olam Haba, it is not reserved only for Jews, that if we gave a heart or a liver or a kidney so that someone could live, right, to do a mitzvah even in our death, that Mashiach will make sure that not only do we have all our organs, but they work twice as well as before, as one sage says it. Three, the question of desecration of the body, right? We do not believe it is desecration to take an organ to donate it. In fact, we think it is the highest act of respect for a dead person to be able to still give life, still do pikuach nefesh, even in their passing. And so it is the ultimate kavod hamet, the ultimate respect to make sure that they're still able to do good in this world, even after they have passed. And lastly, the question of hana'ah, benefiting from a body. Obviously, as long as we're not selling the organs, which we would never do, that's unethical, that doesn't come into it. So each of these four objections can be countered. And we always have to think about the trade-off, right? What's the opposite that can happen? And to understand that, I want to tell you a little bit about my cousin Rebecca, a lovely young lady who passed away just several weeks ago at age 38 while waiting to receive a liver. Rebecca was diagnosed in 2009 with a syndrome called PSC. It's a congenital problem in the liver. The doctors were not terribly concerned. She was young. They said, one day you'll come to us and you'll need a liver transplant, but that day will be a long way away. Now, what's interesting about this disease, PSC, is generally it affects men age 30 to 60. Well, Rebecca a few years ago, became pregnant, which normally would be a wonderful thing. But the doctors really didn't know how a pregnancy would affect someone with PSC because, men ages 30 to 60 rarely or never are affected by that particular condition. So Rebecca went forward with her pregnancy, and over time it became quite clear that the baby was having a very negative effect on her disease. In fact, by midway through her pregnancy, she had to be hospitalized. She lived in DC at the time. She was hospitalized in Hopkins so that they could monitor her liver, what they call a MELD score, which goes from 1 to 50, 1 being perfectly healthy, and 50, more than 50 would be no longer able to survive. So they could monitor that to see how the baby was affecting it. It was clear she was getting sicker and sicker because she was uncomfortable. Her abdominal cavity was filling with fluid. And so she was put on bed rest at Johns Hopkins at 6 months. And sure enough, within a few weeks after that, they came to her and they said, we have to deliver this baby so that we can save his life and your life. And so my cousin Jacob was born just before the Rosh Hashanah, before this past one, and unfortunately failed to save his life. He died 6 or 7 weeks after he was born. And right before Rosh Hashanah of that year, I went up to New Jersey to do his funeral, and we laid him to rest with my grandfather, my Papa Jerry, Rebecca's Papa Jerry, in hopes that he would take care of him. And after the pregnancy was over, Rebecca was supposed to get better, but she didn't. And for 6 months, she really held out hope that she would. The doctor said to her, well, it took 6 months for you to get this sick. It'll take 6 months for you to get better. But she never got better. And for the last year, she suffered terribly. And she spent much time at MCV in Richmond, where she received wonderful care. And they were just incredible doctors who fought for her tooth and nail. And amazing care and concern from my aunt and uncle. But in the end, it was clear she was going to need a new liver, and she was high on the list. Her MELD score went back and forth, and she waited and waited for an O-type liver. The closest she ever got, one time they got a call that there was a liver. There was another person higher on the list than her, but he was a big man and she was a small woman, and it's a small liver, and maybe it'll be yours, so show up at the hospital tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning and we'll let you know. So she and this man show up at the hospital, and they're told, actually, there's someone in Charlottesville who's even higher up on the list, and so they're going to get the liver. It was the only call she ever got, a whole year, 38 years old, and she never got a liver. One never appeared, and on Simchat Torah, after a couple of months really in the hospital and a year of just pain and discomfort, she succumbed to her disease and she passed away. And it was just so tragic. It was just so tragic. And, I went to do her funeral after the holiday, and hundreds of people there. She was a coach and a teacher. She loved to ice skate. And her students and their families came down from Washington, D.C. on such short notice. There were hundreds and hundreds of people at her graveside ceremony. And it was just so sad to think that if only someone had showed up, if only a liver had been available, if someone who passed away had been a registered donor, and then she would still be here with us. And that's the trade-off. That's why organ donation is so important. That's why it is, in fact, a mitzvah. Because, yes, there are those negatives, but they're all dismissed when it comes down to this idea of pekuach nefesh. And not just my cousin, but so many people who are waiting for organs. I gave out statistics to folks. As of April 2018, there were 114,000 candidates on the transplant list in the U.S. 2 out of every 3 people on the waiting list are over the age of 50, but that means 1 out of every 3 is under the age of 50. So under the age of 50, right? So 114, let's call it 100,000 people. That's 35,000, 40,000 young people who are waiting for organs. Of those 114,000 people, we know that 12.1% of them were waiting for a liver. That was April 2018. Now we know that there is one less, but not for a good reason, because she got a liver, but my cousin Rebecca didn't get one. And she died waiting for an organ, and that should never have to happen. If we all register to donate, if we all commit to saving lives in this way, commit to doing this mitzvah even after our death, then that kind of tragedy doesn't have to happen. There's a rabbi, Shmuley Yanklowitz, who's a huge advocate of organ donation. And he tells a story which he claims is true. He himself, by the way, is a living donor, donated a kidney. And he's making the point that when we give a donor, when we help someone in this way, we're really helping ourselves. So how does the story go? So there's a young man who needs, I think it was a kidney, in the Boston area, son of a Holocaust survivor. And they finally find a match. Someone's going to give him a kidney. And so they fly, I think it was to Toronto or Montreal, to meet the family who's going to give him this kidney. And the families meet. And after the father and the son from Boston leave, they get a call from the hospital and they say, "We're very sorry, but the family has decided they're not, in fact, going to share this kidney with you." The guy can't believe it. "Please help. Does he know my situation? I'm a Holocaust survivor. This is my only son. This is the only way our family is going to live on. I've committed so much to his life. Please, please," and they can't. Somehow he finds out where this donor family lives. And he shows up and he knocks on their door. And he says, "Please," the guy says, "What are you doing here? Get out of here." And he says, "Please, do you understand my situation? I'm a Holocaust survivor, and this organ is going to be the legacy of my family. I've invested so much in this child. He's our future." And the guy says, finally succumbs. He says, "You don't recognize me, do you?" And he says, "I'm sorry," the man from Boston says, the survivor from Boston, "I don't." And this donor father says, "Well, you know what? We've met before. We met in the Shoah. When they were taking my boy from me, you worked for the Nazis. And you took my boy, and they told you to kill him. And you did. I never saw my son again. And there's no way I'm giving you the kidney of my son now because of that." And the guy says, "Oh my God, I do recognize you now. I know who you are. You don't understand. I didn't kill your son. I couldn't kill your son. I hid your son. And after the war, I raised him as my own son. And this boy who's in need of a kidney, that is your son. And the reason why your son here is a match is because it's his brother." It's an amazing story. And the truth is, we are all connected. We are all brethren. And the idea that our heart or kidney or liver can give life to another person, that God made us with this miracle of interchangeable parts, right? That there is a chance to live. That is a miracle. And it shows how we are all connected. And it is one that we should make sure we are a part of. And so I encourage you to go to the internet. You can go to Donate Virginia or Donate Life Virginia or wherever you are, and find out how to register and become an organ donor and support organ donorship. Tell people Judaism does believe in organ donation. Not only does it believe in it, it is a great mitzvah and an amazing way to recognize the miraculous way we are all created and the amazing abilities God has given us to help each other. I hope you'll register as a donor, and I hope you'll encourage others to do so as well, so no one will ever have to die again waiting for an organ from somebody who could have given it. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a very good week ahead.